morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Susan Kish, and welcome to OGCI's Talking Transition podcast series, where we take a close look at OGCI and the messy realities of the energy transition. Today, we're going to talk about storing CO2, carbon dioxide, and my guest is Sylvain Thibeau. Sylvain is responsible for CO2 storage at Total, which just announced a target to store 5 million tons of CO2 a year by 2030. Sylvain also leads OGCI's Storage Working Group, which is a pretty unique collection of member company experts who focus on removing those barriers to scaling up CO2 storage. 2 years ago, OGCI funded the development of the CO2 Storage Resource Catalogue, which is an open repository of CO2 storage resources and information and data. Today, we published the first major update, almost a 25% increase in coverage, to 13,000 gigatons of storage resource in locations at 715 sites across 18 countries. So, Sylvain, good morning and welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon, Susan.
Thank you. So can you tell me about the catalog and what it is and what are the resources it provides?
So the catalog was one of the first impulse, I would say, within the OGCI Storage Working Group. The basic idea is that there is a lot of information out there in the scientific literature about CO2 storage resources. However, we felt it might be difficult for non-CCS specialists to understand what is meant by these resources, because many different evaluators, for example, have provided different numbers for the same geological formations. So we felt it was necessary to provide clarity, transparency on how to classify these resources, to provide an insight both on what is the scale of the resources and how mature they are, meaning how ready are we to use these resources to physically store CO2 into these geological formations.
So by pulling this catalog together, what did you find? What were the most interesting things you found around pulling all this data together from around the world?
So a very good news, which is well known by the CCS community, is that there is a wealth of resources at scale of this climate change issue, which is, of course, very good news. What we also found is that a lot of many resource evaluations do not clearly state how practically these resources can be implemented, meaning typically when you have a number, let's say storing so many gigatons in this country, the evaluator did not necessarily say how many wells, what type of infrastructure, what time frame is needed to inject these volumes. And this is why we take the benefit of the SRMS to basically better frame the maturity of these resources.
When you use the term practical, is that the same thing as commercial readiness or commercial maturity?
Absolutely. This is a key term, you're right, commercial readiness, meaning how do we transform a technical idea, I would say, into something that can be deployed with practical means with commercial constraints so that it can be implemented.
So can you give me an illustration of what that means practically? Is that about the number of wells you have to drill or how deep you have to go? Or what does that actually mean?
So typically, and again, we use the SRMS for this, the Storage Resource Management System, which was developed by the SPE, Society of Petroleum Engineers, in 2017. And also, we thank SPE for having developed this system. Basically, the SRMS says there are a series of questions you should be asking yourself when you make an evaluation. The first question is, can this resource be considered as discovered? Because, of course, you can say, okay, I could store so many gigatons in this country again, but maybe I need some further drilling campaigns or seismic acquisition campaigns. Maybe this process could take many years. So, of course, meaning we are far from a practical implementation of the resource. So one question is it discovered? Another question is it Can it be commercial? Is there a regulatory framework in this country? Is it physically accessible? And then another question is it is the owner ready to take an investment decision on this resource? And then basically we call it capacity when we are ready to take an investment decision. So it's like a gate process where you have a series of steps in order to make sure the resource can be implemented based on a specified project description. So the SRMS is proposing to use the term resource
Okay.
when you're not ready yet for FID, final investment decision, and then to use capacity when it's ready to be developed and almost under your feet with infrastructure ready to be built. One issue is that some of these buckets you have mentioned are prospective resources, meaning it remains to be confirmed both their scale. As of today, it's an expectation, it's a prospect in an exploration terminology, and they are not confirmed, meaning discovered yet. So that's one issue. The second issue is that these resources may be not spread equally around the world, maybe not spread proportionally to the current CO2 emissions and forecasted future emissions. So remains to be basically discovered resources in specific parts, countries in the world where which are large emitters. So the more spread around, the easier it will be, of course, to deploy CCS.
Got it. And if I were to map the concepts of resource and capacity to the concept of commercial readiness, I'm assuming you can't have commercial readiness if you're still at just the resource stage. Did I get those right?
So capacity
Mm-hmm.
is the name you use once you are ready to take investment decision. So if you're considering a new project somewhere in the world, maybe they are still in a prospective phase. Maybe they are still making desktop studies. Maybe they are still working on their financing concepts, etc., agreeing with the regulators on how to proceed. All this would be labeled as prospective resources. The day uh, there is a public announcement that there is a final investment decision taken and we can start the construction of the infrastructure leading to this CCS project, then we call it capacity.
So, the kind of process you're describing and the steps and the gates, as you call them, they sound similar to when I hear people describing the challenges of taking hydrocarbons out of the ground. In other words, it sounds like the process and thoughts and structure for storing CO2 in the ground is similar to thoughts and structure and process for taking hydrocarbons out of the ground.
You're absolutely correct. So the SRMS, Storage Resource Management System, is like a twin brother or sister of the PRMS, Petroleum Resource Management System, which was set up and is still being developed and improved by the SP again, aiming at following a similar process for oil and gas extraction, production. And because it is well known, because it has been validated for decades, the OGCI believes we should use a similar system in order to facilitate the deployment of CCS.
So, is it the same kind of engineering skills, the same kind of engineering background? Because I'm often struck by how comfortable the petroleum engineers seem to be with the concepts of carbon storage.
Well, deployment is about indeed technical issues, like again, how many wells, for example, would you need, but also commercial challenges. How can you commercially realize this? What type of financing background do you have to implement this? Also, regulatory issues. So it's not just about engineering or geosciences. It's also about project development.
Got it. So the IA recently published a net zero report saying that 10 heavy industrial plants would need to be equipped with carbon capture technology every month from 2030. In other words, this whole concept of carbon storage would have to go to enormous scale very, very fast. Are we building up to that? And what will be the role? Will storage be a constraint to that, or is storage really going to be an enabler to getting to that scale that fast?
So this is indeed a challenge. So the CCS industry is not developing fast enough. There are a series of hurdles. So we make basically our best within OGCI to try to solve gaps. We felt this CO2 storage resource maturity mapping was and is still a gap, and we hope this is resolved thanks to the catalog, but certainly there are other challenges in order to enable the fast development that you mentioned.
You mentioned the need for regulators, investors, as well as engineers to be involved in the development of these kinds of projects. Are these also the target audience for the CO2 storage catalog? And what kind of questions will they be asked from it?
Absolutely. On the one part, it's we believe the catalog is of use for, I would say, CCS specialists like geologists, geophysicists, or engineers. On the other hand, we also expect it will provide, again, transparency and clarity on CO2 storage resources for those who do not necessarily have deep geoscientific skills, like a CO2 emitter, an industrial owner that would eventually implement CCS locally around his or her assets. They would hopefully find information on where to practically store CO2, I would say, in their neighborhood. Also, it should be relevant to regulators or that will have an idea of what are the stakes in their countries in order to also better understand the issues and the technical feasibility of CCS deployment in their country.
So who actually pulls the data together for the catalog? It's not the member companies of OGCI, right?
You are correct. So we took the decision not to go through an OGCI evaluation process, I would say, because
Mm-hmm.
indeed we benefit from scientific evaluations that has lasted over more than 2 decades, reviewing basins all over the world. So it
Hmm.
was really out of scope to revisit in depth and reevaluate all these geological basins. So our idea was again to use this SRMS in order to reclassify, thanks to an evaluation team, which is based in Pale Blue Dot Energy that we thank today and works together with Global CCS Institute in order to classify these public assessments that you can find on the literature and which are properly referenced so that any person reading through the catalog can know where the information comes from and who has made these evaluations. So the Pay Blue Dot and GCCSI, they thanks to their assessment team, they classify this according to the SRMS before posting it on the catalog.
Got it. And the catalog is free, right? It's free, it's open. Effectively, it's open source.
It's free, it's open to everybody. There is no login information required. You can download all the information you want so that you can make scientific studies, research on CO2 storage. You can also hopefully provide feedback, and anyone can help us make it even better.
If I understand correctly, the project in total is to run for 6 years. So there are 4 more annual updates coming. Is it just going to include more and more sites, or how do you expect the catalog to develop?
Indeed, we are so far with some countries, so you can see the countries on the website. And we hope, of course, to cover the full geography. Also, we will need some regular updates because some countries, I would say, are very active in CCS, and there are many more assessments coming, so that we, at the end of the day, all the geography is covered. But one even more important thing for us is that, again, the CCS geoscientific and engineering community uh, takes this catalog and help us co-develop this tool together so that eventually, first, as I said, provide feedback and uh, help us improve the catalog, and then in the future, eventually, seeing the benefit of this SRMS classification system, we hope that future evaluation will be directly based uh, from the SRMS principles so that it can be uploaded much more simply into the catalog to make it a fully open, both uh, downloading and uploading evaluation for the CCS community.
So in other words, you're looking for it to really be an open platform where
Absolutely.
entities, researchers, developers can both upload information as well as download information.
Yes, this is, of
Um,
course, the ultimate goal.
Got it. And you mentioned the word public. All the data that's within it is currently in the public sphere, or is any of it protected in any way or privately held?
So we made the choice indeed to reclassify public evaluations, meaning things you can search on public databases, scientific journals, or websites. For us, it's important that there is a track on who are the authors, so that any people like analyzing, reviewing the catalog can know precisely how, when this was established, and by which authors.
If I understand correctly, if I read your bio, you've been looking at operational storage studies, what sounds like around the world: France, North Sea, America, Asia. When you see a storage site, what does this actually mean? Is this basalt? Is this a saline aquifer, which I've never actually understood what a saline aquifer is? But what is a storage site?
Excellent questions. So the CCS community has developed many CO2 geological storage concepts. And as of today, the SRMS only addresses two of them, which are believed to be the most interesting, I would say, or easy to implement CO2 storage strategies. One of these strategies is storing CO2 into saline aquifers. So saline aquifer meaning pore formation, deep geological formations filled up with saline water having no practical usage for example, agriculture or direct human usage. That's one type. And the other type being CO2 injection into depleted oil and gas or exhausted oil and gas reservoirs, meaning uh, geological formation from which we have extracted hydrocarbons and that we can now use to re-inject back CO2. So as of today, the SRMS does not tackle the CO2 EOR, uh, which has, of course, a very strong CO2 storage component. And we hope that in the future versions of the SRMS, this will be addressed. Also, you mentioned other potential strategies like storing into basalts or shale gas or methane hydrates or coal beds. All these alternative storing strategies remains to be evaluated in greater detail, and we hope it will be also described for future release of the SRMS, then of the catalog.
And who effectively controls or decides what's in and what's out of the SRMS? You mentioned the SPE. How does that body work, and how do they make those kind of decisions?
Excellent question. So the SPE has, I would say, a subcommittee in charge of writing the SRMS, which has written the SRMS, currently writing the
Mhm.
technical guidelines of the SRMS in order to provide examples, illustration, more details on how to practically implement this SRMS. So the decision was taken to start with the two most prolific CO2 storage methods, I would say, which have been implemented already for more than 2 decades when it comes to storing CO2 in saline aquifer, by starting with Sleipner in the North Sea, and also storing CO2 in depleted oil and gas reservoirs. So storing CO2 through the CO2 EOR process is a little bit more challenging because, of course, it is both covered by the PRMS as CO2 EOR, enhanced oil recovery, is a mean of extracting more hydrocarbons, and the coupling from with these two systems, the SRMS and the PRMS, is not fully ready yet, but we hope it will be ready in the near future, sorry. When it comes to other storing strategies, the other one I mentioned, like basalts and others, they are much less mature technologies, meaning that we have not seen injection at industrial scale yet, but of course we hope they will rapidly develop and grow.
Got it. So just a final question before we turn to the last section. Is there, from your perspective, what are the 2 or 3 things that are most unique about the CO2 storage catalog that would make it the go-to place if I'm an investor or I'm a developer and thinking about starting a CO2 project?
So the first very important point of the catalog is to provide clarity on CO2 storage resources, not only the scale, meaning the quantities, but as we discussed, the maturity. Indeed, CCS investors shall know the type of investments that may be needed or that will be needed to deploy CCS industry on their projects. The second point is that the SRMS is a project-based system. Basically, whenever an evaluator says, I could store so many gigatons of CO2, it is supposed to be explained how practically, with what type of infrastructures, what type of pipelines, number of wells, whether you should extract brine for pressure maintenance, etc. So the project should be described to enable these resources. So what we found is that as of today, too many assessments are not attached to a development concept. And this leaves uncertainty on how practically to deploy these resources. So we just encourage evaluators in the future to use the SRMS and to describe notional projects that would be needed in order to implement these resources. And finally, the third main point is that, of course, we hope the catalog will be appreciated and used. It's a tool for the CCS community. We also hope more and more evaluators will use the SRMS and feed the catalog in the future with SRMS compliant evaluations.
Fantastic. So, Sylvain, I'm going to close with a more personal question. If I understand correctly, you were trained as a reservoir engineer, but you've been working in carbon storage since 2000. You've published widely, both articles and books. And as I mentioned earlier, you worked around the world looking at storage. So, what is it about carbon storage that has kept you both curious and committed for more than 20 years? And what do you hope for in the next few years? Because it feels like we're at a tipping point in these questions around carbon storage.
So basically, CO2 storage is technically exciting. It's about gathering many disciplines together in order to develop projects. And of course, you could say this is quite the same for any type of industry, whether oil and gas and other. Basically, CO2 storage brings other different challenges, which are always very nice to handle. Then, of course, CO2 storage is also about environment, about climate change, fighting climate change, which is also fascinating and very motivating. So basically, during these 20 years, there has been ups and downs in the CCS industry. We hope we are close following the Paris Agreement and the development of new project, new dynamics in many parts of the world with different regulatory systems in place. We hope it's going to expand. And so the challenges are, how do we build projects which are both efficient and, of course, environmentally safe, and also to check that, as you said, these resources will be at scale of the climate change. So there is both, I would say, a local and a global challenge that are absolutely exciting to be in.
Wonderful. Sylvain, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
So, listeners, thank you also for joining us today. Please visit our website, ogci.com, to learn more, download the data, explore the map, and see the new updates for the CO2 Storage Resource Catalogue. and learn about the CCUS projects and technology investments of OGCI Climate Investments, our billion-plus fund that invests in technologies and projects to accelerate decarbonization. Please listen or download the Talking Transition podcast on Spotify, Google, or Apple, or on our website, ogci.com. We've had several recent conversations on CCUS, an overview about the technology and its potential, especially in California with Professor Sally Benson at Stanford, a deep dive into Northern Lights, an OGCI Kickstarter project with several of our member companies with Martin Smith, and some of the key findings from a detailed review of CCS potential, including storage, in Saudi Arabia with Tijani Nias. And finally, thanks to our production team here at OGCI, to our editor for this edition, Delia Methcone, and our producer, Jason De La Cruz. Thank you, stay safe, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Energy plays today with every single segment of the economy. It's not only turning the lights or driving a car, it's also producing any goods, any materials, shipping them, delivering them, refrigerating food, allowing access to education. I mean, the energy is really part of every single segment of the economy. So believing that the transition will be made only by new entrants is, to me, a risky idea. The 12 members of OGCI account approximately for 30% of the oil and gas production. So those companies are joining forces basically to accelerate the development of solution toward a low carbon future. Then it's what do you account in your net zero, which is the critical aspect, because the own emission of the oil and gas industry, as we mentioned, is 4 gigatons. So on that, they have control. They have, they can, play a role, a direct role. But the rest is the scope 3, and the scope 3 is something that is a shared, responsibility between the who is delivering the product to the market and who is buying it and driving the demand and consuming and burn it. And this is outside of the control of the member companies. So it's something that is to come as a joint effort, I would say.
There isn't a huge amount of time for us to do this, so let's get on with it.